Welcome everybody. My name is Rick Addante. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Psychology, and I'm honored to be able to share the time with you guys today, and I want to thank you guys for coming and letting me share in your time. I want to share with you guys a story of a really cool experience that I had working with NASA, but not just working with there, but for me the coolest experience was the learning experience about a lot of lessons I learned about teamwork, leadership, followership, and getting along with people, not just in preparation for a trip to Mars, but in preparation for all of our trips here on Earth. And so I'd like to share that story with you and sort of focus on what we've sort of identified today, building a culture of teamwork in higher education, lessons from Mars to Earth. And so the project that I'll talk to you guys a little bit about was called the Human Exploration Research Analog. So you'll hear me refer to that as HERA. And I was on mission 14, which is that Roman numeral down there. And it was really quite an honor to represent CSUSB there, but really to, like I said, kind of learn the lessons that we picked up. And I'll share a little bit about that as we go on, but kind of wanted to do sort of an informal sort of presentation today, hopefully interactive, and we can kind of talk along the way. So feel free to stop me, throw some questions out there. I have a lot of different versions of presentations from these kind of topics. And today I want to talk mostly about the teamwork side. And so sort of the place that maybe we can start off from is a brief history lesson. And so in 1959, actually almost a year ago to the day, we selected what was famously known as the Mercury 7 astronauts. So these are them here, included probably most famous of which was John Glenn, who recently passed away, I believe, last year or so. And in 1959, the unknown systems for space exploration was machine. We didn't understand the rocketry, the engineering. We were still testing that stuff out. And so we hired rocket engineers, that is, test pilots who had advanced degrees in mechanical or aeronautical engineering in order to test these systems out. What was happening at the same time was we also had some things happening in the world scientifically of psychology. So I know we have a couple psychology majors here in the room. Maybe you guys recognize this gentleman here. It's B.F. Skinner. So he's kind of the father of operant conditioning. And what he has here is this little, what I'll call an analog, as you'll see if our conversation moves along. But in particular, this was what we call a Skinner box. So he has a little pigeon here, it looks like, and he's going to do some tests on it. Now, what's striking about this contrast is that during this time, the exact same day, the same year, 1959, we did not put B.F. Skinner in our rocket ships. And that made a lot of sense. However, in the modern era, today, in 2019, the unknown systems for space exploration is no longer the rocketry and the engineering. We've made vast strides in understanding that, but it remains that the unknown frontier there is ourselves. It's our minds, it's our brains, and particularly how we get along with each other. And I'll explain that in a little bit more depth as we move along. Now, noticeably, what we're doing now in 2019 is we're not just testing the engineers, but now the engineers are testing us as people, and particularly my background as a psychologist came to bear on this large study of psychology, understanding not just the human mind in isolation and confinement for such a long trip to Mars, but also how we get along as a team. So that's important for a handful of reasons. Most notably is this trajectory that we have planned as a nation, as a planet, as a species, to go from our planet to another. That is, this is the journey for Mars that NASA's kind of sketched out, and this is actually just a photograph I took from what's called Rocket Park at Johnson Space Center. So our task as a species, if we want to go to the red planet, is to basically start here on Earth. So imagine you're here, because you are, on Earth. What we got to do is we want to be here. Point number 2, on Mars. Now, we'd also kind of like to do this, which is to come home. And the challenge is not getting to Mars. We're there. Here in Southern California, we're right around the corner from the Jet Propulsion Lab. They've landed several robots and rockets and machines and rovers on Mars. We got the rocketry. The challenge here is that we must survive each other for 3 years in a small capsule. So what I'd like you to do is take a moment and imagine that you are in a summer road trip with maybe 3 of your favorite family members who you love, or maybe 3 of your best friends who you really, really like. Now, on this summer road trip, let's say 3 months in the summer, let's say that you can't get out of that vehicle, that RV. For a breath of fresh air, there's a bathroom in the RV, so you don't need to go out to use the bathroom. Might get a little smelly, but you're just going to manage that. Okay? And you can't get out. And you have to get along with each other that whole time. Even when every now and then the people you love, the people that you like, they might get on your nerves a little bit. Get some, maybe a breath of fresh air you want to do. You can't. You got to figure out how you're going to get along for that entire duration. Now take that 3-month road trip and make it a 3-year round trip. And then make sure that you swap out the situations so that it's not your 3 most beloved family members or your 3 bestie friends, but now they're 3 coworkers. Because if you're lucky enough to be picked as an astronaut, the odds are really exceptionally good they're not also going to pick your family to be astronauts with you. It's a tough gig. So they're just going to be essentially coworkers from the astronaut corps. You're going to have to go to Mars with some people that you work with and that you hope you really, really like and get along with. They're coworkers. And that's kind of what the relationship is that I'll kind of talk about through the rest of the conversation today is sharing what we learned about our mission in the context of how that can inform how we get along maybe in our regular everyday lives on Earth as well. Because we all have coworkers, and we all need to get along in our own cubicles at times, right? And in our own trips, we all have to take, whether they're in a capsule or in our minds together on a project, we got to make these things happen, and I think we can learn a lot from what these efforts are showing. So, when we go to Mars, our rockets are going to work, but the question is, will the people? Right? So many of you guys don't know, or you might recognize this scene. This is a clip from the movie Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey, and these are 2 astronauts in the movie. We have McConaughey here on the right, who is Cooper, and the brilliant Dr. Mann, as the movie referred to Matt Damon as in this scene. Now, any of you guys who haven't seen the movie, it's been years, so I'm just totally going to spoil it for you. Okay? So this is a fight. This is a battle royale. It's about to go down on Mars. And these guys are about to fight, and not just will they fight, one of them's going to succeed in killing the other. In the process of killing the other, they're going to blow up their spaceship. It's pretty catastrophic. That's not due to an engineering failure. It's not due to an O-ring, as we saw in the Space Shuttle Challenger. It is due to a human interaction problem, a failure of teamwork and cognition. That's where psychology kind of came in. So these teamwork failures can be catastrophic. And of course, on missions like these, failure is most certainly not an option. So that's kind of where the framework is of not just our mission, but kind of what I'll try to talk about today. And the way that NASA is approaching that is through something called the Human Research Program. And what they're doing is they're conducting their largest psychology study that I know about that they've ever conducted in history, because it's been taking many, many years through many, many missions. And about every 4 or 5 months, they put together a new crew of 4 people to live in this capsule, as you see here. And it's called the Human Exploration Research Analog, HERA. And it's an Earth-based facility where we study humans getting along with each other, or not, on a simulated trip to Mars, or an asteroid, or to the moon. And we call these environments analogous to space, so you'll see me refer to them as analogs. That's where the A comes from, the Human Exploration Research Analog. So this is kind of a snapshot, and I'll give you some scenes into this. So what this is a specialized laboratory for testing the states of the human mind. Not just the individual human mind, but the various elements that contribute to the mind and which the mind itself contributes to. So we're the test pilots for these human systems that we need for deep space exploration. What I'm really going to focus on today is the teamwork, the group dynamics, team cohesion, how we select and survive our teammates. But we studied lots of stuff in here: nutrition, exercise, sleep, of course the psychology and neuroscience of these factors. We look at medicine, microbiology, botany. We got to grow some plants. If any of you guys are fans of the movie The Martian. So I grew a lot of potatoes, I think. We also did some engineering, maintenance, all this good stuff. Got to fly flight simulators, lunar landers, and we did a lot of virtual reality for spacewalks. So through all of this, we're working as a team. Not only do you have to work individually on your own, much like work, but every now and then you have to interact on projects, but you also have to be relied on to pull your own weight individually. And so this is where it all happens. This is our tiny capsule. It's about 630 square feet or so, 3 stories, and this is our crib. This is where all the magic happens. Now, you don't know your teammates beforehand. You're all selected separately, and you just become friends really fast, or at least you try to. So let's see here. So this is kind of a snapshot of what we have, and sort of the story I want to tell is kind of how our mission shook out and what I learned from it. So let me just make sure I didn't skip a slide. There we go. Okay, so this is a snapshot of our very first day on the mission, and we're all walking into work just like we all walk into work every day. There's nothing fancy on the outside. We're just going to a gigantic hangar, like many of us go to a gigantic building to work. So these are my crewmates. Now, you'll notice there's another leg here. There's a 4th member, and I'm the person taking this picture. So what this tells us is a couple things. First and foremost, I'm not on the team. So the way it shook out was this. I was picked as backup. Now, I'll kind of share a little bit of the story of how I ended up becoming crew. But the reason I mention this is to underscore one of the first things I learned from the mission that I want to be able to share with people, and which is sort of these 3 points. So, main thing I learned from the first day of showing up for duty is, like, I had to check my ego. I had to start thinking of other people first, and I had to do these 3 things as well: be patient, humble, and kind. And here's what I mean by that. I'll tell you a little story. So, when I applied for this program, I got an email back, maybe a month or 2 later. Excuse me, it wasn't an email. I got a phone call about 7 in the morning. The lady said, "Hi, I'm so-and-so from Johnson Space Center. I have your application for the HERA program, and I want to thank you for it. It's one of the best resumes we've ever seen. But I want to let you know that you're never going to do this mission." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "It looks great, but this is a huge psychology study. We study a lot of learning, a lot of memory, neuroscience, psychology, and we're reading your resume, and it's great, but that's what you do. You study learning and memory and psychology and neuroscience, and we think you're going to know a little bit too much about it. Basically, you're overqualified." And I said, "Okay, well, ma'am, I think you have a misunderstanding here." I said, "I'm not nearly half as smart as my resume seems. You can ask any of my friends." And, we talked for a little bit. She said, "All right, well, we always need people as reserve, so we'll keep you on backup." And I said, "Hey, that's just keep me in mind. That's all." And so I kind of did this process of how I got to be standing here, heading into this gigantic facility, was by first being told no, and then being asked to be reconsidered, and finally being brought on and reconsidered, but under the auspice of a backup. And so that's kind of the framework I'll talk a little bit about. Some of the lessons I learned was because when I went there to interview then, a little bit later, they said, we got a great mission here. This was April at the time, and would you be ready to do it in a week? And I said, "Well, this is my first year as a faculty member at CSUSB. The spring semester starts in a week, and I'm teaching a class that graduating seniors need to graduate. If this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I will take this position, but I want you to know what's going to be sacrificed. I'm going to be burning a lot of bridges at work. There's going to be a lot of students who are going to suffer from this. If this is the only shot this will ever happen," they said, "No, we have another one that's coming up in the summer. Why don't we plan for that?" And I said, "Good, because I want to make sure that we can keep our students graduating. We don't want to affect other people in a negative way." So I was waiting to get called to go on this mission. And the whole time, I was feeling pretty good about it. I had been a finalist for the astronaut position about 6 months earlier. I knew I was highly qualified for this position. And then they called and they said, we're not ready, wait another month. And then they called again, they said, we're still not ready, wait another week. And then they called and said, well, okay, fine, congratulations, you're on the mission, but you're a backup. We found 4 other people who, and they don't say this, right? But it sounds like they say, we found 4 other people we like more than you. We think are better than you, or whatever, right? And so this is where that first point, I had to check my ego, right? So right off the bat, I was a little miffed, and I was like, oh, geez, man, I want to go, I want to be the man, I want to play varsity, And it took me about 5 minutes, I cooled down, and I realized that I had just been learning from a guy who flies about an hour up the road. You guys know Palmdale? Right? Up in the high desert. He flies the U-2, which goes up to just about space for NASA. And I bumped into him at Hangar 24. You guys know Hangar 24? We were having a beer. I said, hey, I got this great kid. I'm looking forward to NASA. I'm hoping that it's going to happen. What are your tips? He said, 1, check your ego. He said, no matter what happens, you always have to put the team first. And so, as I was a little miffed, for a moment I was a little insulted. I didn't want to be the backup. I remembered his words. They rung in my ear. And I said, all right, I got to put all that aside. The team's first. And this is a great chance to serve a team. And from that point on, everything changed. And I said, let's embrace this. Let's embrace this opportunity to serve the team. Let's find ways that we can think of others first. And I started thinking about role models that I knew, like him, and how would he approach this to have a good attitude. Really took this approach of being patient, humble, and kind. So one of the guys that I interviewed with for the space program ended up getting picked. And he was a medical doctor. It was fantastic. Very humble, very kind, very quiet. And I knew him for a couple days, for about a week. It was incredible. And he just got picked right before this. Be a real astronaut, not a fake one like us, right? And when he was announced by Vice President of the United States, I learned something. He had thousands of hours of combat hours flying Black Hawk helicopters that he just neglected to mention for the week that we were interviewing together. And I was like, that's sandbagging. He never told me he was not just a badass medical doctor for special force. He also flies helicopters? Holy jeez. And what it did is it gave me a role model. And I said, wow, if he can be humble, patient, and kind, and that humble to where he doesn't even have to mention those things, invited as a backup, I said, why don't I try to be like Frank? And it really helped me to grow. And I think it helped our team to grow, as we'll see. So, I put all that baggage aside. None of my teammates even knew that I had interviewed for the astronaut program because I started thinking about them. Well, I don't want to step on their toes. I don't want them to feel that I'm going to be trying to take their spot because it's their spot. And so from that vantage point, we started moving forward. Fast forward, and they actually had to replace someone on short notice, and I got asked to step in. And so this is actually in Palmdale, where those U-2s take off and land. And I was glad to step in. And so it kind of gave me this experience where here I was interviewing. We went from screening to selection and then to crew. And now I'm selected as a backup, not quite in there. And now selected, we got the flight suit, we're all ready to go. And it really underscored this idea I want to talk about a little bit of service leadership. So this idea of putting the team first. So I went there and I had to check that ego, said, what can I do every single day to think of the other teammates? How can whatever I do today not find a way to get me into the mission? How can it instead find a way to help them succeed? So this idea of leading from a point of service really made an impact on me. And when I was called to step in, we were already so integrated as a team because they didn't feel threatened. We already had a good vibe. They knew that I was there for them first, that we were able to make that seamless transition and keep the mission going. So something that I learned from that was, one, prioritize the team, and that we can't take yourself too seriously. So after this was all done, there was an article that was written. They made a little cartoon, and so I thought it was important to just kind of note that, laugh at ourselves. You know, that's all. We're cartoons at the end of the day of ourselves. And so, this idea of checking our ego and really being a team player that's there to serve others first. And I was reminded that, this wasn't the first time that I got to learn these things. I was a walk-on wrestler in college. Division III, which is the lowest level there is in college. And I was a walk-on JV, which is the worst of that worst level. So I was essentially a total piece of dirt. And the coach didn't even know my name, and when he did, he spelled it wrong. And then they actually spelled it on rosters on the wrong team sometimes because I was nobody. It was really embarrassing. And worse than all that, I got the living heck kicked out of me day in and day out, and then night in and night out for a long, long time. But we learned to be a backup, and we learned how to be a backup, to serve the team, be a participating member, and let them beat you up as you're pushing them forward so that your workout partner becomes a national champion. That's the role we were able to play. I had forgotten that temporarily. And this was able to remind me. So one, it let me know that we don't always remember the things that we learn. So we got to kind of be reminded of these things to be a good follower, and that kind of gives an opportunity to lead. So I started thinking to myself, maybe this is really good followership, right? How do we think of what everybody else needs so that we can serve that team? Well, if that's what you do as a backup, how is that any different from being the captain? Isn't that what the captain should be doing? Thinking about everybody else, putting them forward? So I think that's pretty useful on both ends. And so kind of this, having a mindset and attitude and the preparation of a backup that I think helps to actually underscore the service leadership model, which is that, we're not important individually, but the team is more important. Our interests, needs, preference don't matter as much as others. And particularly in the context of being a backup, right, we're always got to be ready. Okay? So when we're always ready, then we should take our job seriously, but not take ourselves seriously. It allows us to not be threatening to the other people that we're working with together. It allows them to respect us, that they see that we want to be a contributing member of the team rather than butting heads and butting egos. And I figure that if you take that attitude forward, right, and we take that attitude of serving others, then how much more can our teams thrive? And so from that point, we became integrated with our team. So I'll introduce you a little bit to who we were working with. It was really a fantastic group, and it was an honor to be a part of the team with them. Dr. Shelley Cazares is actually from outside of the Bakersfield areas where she grew up, had an illustrious career, doing engineering degrees at MIT, then Oxford, and then worked at the Pentagon as an engineer. She was one of our mission specialists. Dr. Paul Haugen was our commander. He has a PhD in biomedical engineering from Rice University and spent 10 years as a flight engineer for the T-38 jets, which are basically unarmed fighter jets that the astronauts train in. He's an awesome dude. Really great. And Reinhold Povilatis, it was a mechanical engineer that runs the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter at Arizona State. So that's a satellite that circles the moon, takes a bunch of digital photographs, and he reconstructs those mathematically in the data to create images of the lunar surface. And he's now actually doing another mission in Russia, as it turns out, with some cosmonauts right now. So when you'll see some pictures of our team, this is who we are. And there really is a team beyond the team. And so this is another thing that I kind of wanted to really share, this learning lesson that I picked up, is that we were just tiny, tiny little cogs in the wheel. We're only there for a few months at best, but there is a huge team at NASA and beyond that has the mission control staff, the scientists, the operational engineers, everybody putting this on. They spend years doing this, and we're just their little lab rats and guinea pigs. When we talk about teamwork, we talk about layers of it. Right, so there's a team that you might work with. We have a team here. I see some people from my laboratory. We have a team in the lab, but we're a part of the larger team in the department, with the larger team in the college, and certainly within the university. And we work together, not just to represent our university, but to conduct the research that we're doing. And so that really underscored this large team role. And we worked in smaller pairs, though. So here they are, kind of their cubicle. This is their flight controls of the rocket ship simulator, essentially. Some of you guys might be familiar with working with people in cubicles at shared desk spaces. It was just the same for us. And so we got to get along. Can't get out. You're in that long car ride. And we're being tested on how well we perform on these procedures. We would go out and do these simulated spacewalks. This is approaching an asteroid. I was EVA green, and Dr. Gazzarez was red, and she would go to that red dot, and I'd go to this green dot. And there was a lot of teamwork involved because we couldn't see. We had our virtual reality goggles on, but we would have to perform teamwork maneuvers amongst ourselves while down there, while also performing teamwork maneuvers, communicating on the radios with these gentlemen back in the hat. And so it was kind of a combination of flying and diving, and we really needed good team communication. And it took time because we had to practice it. We weren't good at first. But with time, we were able to develop that in a little bit more precision. From there, we got to do some collection of the asteroid samples, simulations, of course, and sort of process that. But you can see we start to work as a team towards that goal. And the important thing I want to mention is through this process of a 45-day mission locked up with no contact with the outside world, outside of mission control, we didn't really have a lot of sleep. So this was our bunks, but it was a sleep deprivation study. So you can see it's pretty empty in here because we pretty much were forbidden from using it. So remember that car ride analogy we talked about? Now you can't sleep. A little bit, yes, sir.
How many bodies fits in there?
This is a single one. This is just, you have your own bunk space. Yeah, it's a really good question. Although, here's the thing. Every about 4 months or so, they start a new mission, and they change them. So, this is a zipper that opens this door. What you can do is you can take these parts off. So in the current mission, they've zipped this out so it's not so private anymore. You don't even have that personal space this time around. They told me that. I was like, phew. Thanks for doing that after our mission. All right. Shared bathroom. Can't get out. 45 days. Now we had a really nice situation because we had a bathroom door. Now they've taken the door away.
The one girl is a boss.
I'm sorry?
I said the one girl is a boss.
Oh, she's absolutely a boss because we had our flight suits on, and when you had to go to the bathroom, you had to take this whole flight suit off, and it's very difficult. And we had gear all over us and sensors. It really wasn't a trivial thing, particularly in the middle of the night when you're on maybe sneaking off your 4 to 5 hours of sleep, and we sleep in the top, and the bathroom is 3 stories down. You got to climb up and down the ladders. Now you're awake, and you can't even go back to bed. A boss indeed.
Yeah.
Really, really impressive. So, while you're doing that, they're testing our teamwork. They're testing our psychology. We're filling out lots and lots of surveys. This is an iPad here. You can see we're having surveys of ourselves, of our teams. Sometimes we like it, thumbs up. Sometimes we don't like it, thumbs down. And we're rating each other. We're rating ourselves. 20 different surveys a day, every type of psychological battery you can imagine, and assessing how well the team is working together, because there's things that we would do to cause challenges in the team. Little exercises or little tasks we do. Now, a lot of people ask, what did NASA do to cause issues in the team, to create these psychological stresses? Any ideas?
Take stuff away.
Huh?
Did they take stuff away?
They did take certain things away. Yeah. Sometimes we would have equipment break. And we would have a 3D printer is the only thing that we could print with, and we would have to print a solution, print some new equipment, print a tool to use to fix the equipment that you would then print after the tool. What else could happen in a team breakdown? Yeah.
Simulate an emergency.
Absolutely, yeah. Simulate an emergency. We definitely had that. And in fact, we had real emergencies. Turns out we got hit by Hurricane Harvey. So those simulations, those practice actually helped us make perfect. What else could you do? Yeah.
Maybe like a little bit of a shortage on like food or supplies.
Okay, so some shortage of food and supplies.
Yeah, or something where you had to like minimize that.
Some rations, yeah. So we didn't have that happen in this mission because they were doing some other nutritional studies on us, but that's definitely some. Yeah. I'll tell you the biggest thing they did. You want to know?
Yeah.
Yes, Pat.
I was thinking perhaps virus.
I'm sorry?
Perhaps a virus
Oh.
that was some of your data?
Yeah, a virus. So we definitely had computer problems that were somewhat created to see how do we debug a robot. We had to build robots and then program the code and debug it. So those things can definitely cause frustration and team strife. The biggest thing they did, are you ready? Nothing. Just let them be. Put 4 people. Basically, take 4 of you guys and go to one of those back rooms and close the door. Lock it
For like a long time.
for 45 days. Just sit back and watch. And that's exactly what they did. We had cameras everywhere. So, not only that, you're on tape 24/7, with the exception of the bathroom and the bed areas. Yes, Rob?
I was wondering, did you find after a while that you became sort of inured to the camera? Once you know they're there, but after a while, just ignore it, right?
Yeah, totally. So that was a great question Robbie had. After a period of time, you stop caring about the camera. So the first couple days, first week or so, you're like kind of self-conscious about it. You have to wear audio recorders, I guess, like this, 24 all over. So you're very conscientious about what you're saying, and everyone here wants to progress and go be an astronaut later. So that you're basically, think of it as a giant job interview where your boss or future boss is watching you 24 hours a day while you're cranky, tired, sleepy. How many of you guys would want to go let your boss watch you? Our Commander Hagen did. He worked there. His bosses and coworkers got to watch him get out of bed at 7 in the morning every day in his PJs, cranky, tired, deal with any personal issues that we were having, and then have it all on tape for all these cameras everywhere. That's pretty brave of them.
But if somebody chickened out, they would just run home and share it.
It's a good question. People chicken out. So obviously you know what you're getting into at this point, and you're given every option. Look, if you can't do it, you can't do it. And some people decide that it's not for them.
But like during,
Well,
no option for that.
I don't know. So by the way, the door's not locked.
Okay.
That's you want to talk about psychological training. The door's not actually locked. So there is a research study. So they're governed by an IRB, an Institutional Review Board for Ethics. They can't actually lock us in. They have to say you're free to leave whenever you want. So any prison you're in is a prison of your mind. Right? So every time somebody's really just driving you nuts, you'd be like, screw it. I don't have to stay here. But you do.
Yeah.
So it's a little tricky. Let's see here. So we did all this, but we also had a lot of fun. And so I kind of want to pivot now. I showed you a little bit about what's happening in the mission and what is it that we have to work on as a team, these spacewalks, these fixing broken problems in the equipment and the software, and certainly amongst ourselves. But we learned a lot about how to be a great team because we had a lot of fun. And so we built a lot of good rapport, and we learned some core things that I'm still learning from. And I just want to, take some time to share with you because there's an African proverb that says if you want to go fast, you should go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And this is just as true, I believe, for going to Mars as it is for going to work every day. And none of us are an island. None of us here could do this individually. We all had our own breakdowns, we all had our own limits, and we all needed each other to get through. But it wasn't just us as a team, it really was the broader team. And I'll share with that a little bit too, because these are kind of your teammates. These are kind of your people that you work with. But we all have bosses and supervisors, and we had that too. We had mission control. So if we come here, this is mission control. That's our supervisor. That's our department chair, our dean, our president, our provost, whoever it is that's our boss at work, right? So they're constantly on the radio watching you, maybe like your boss, I hope not, but, right? And not just watching you, it's a constant teamwork because they're on the radio talking to you like at the International Space Station. You're fixing something, you need help, you are blind, you can't see anything in terms of outside the capsule, you don't know what's going on. You have to rely on them as a team, and they're not inside, they have to rely on you as a team. So you have this second layer of teamwork, not amongst ourselves, but with us and the larger team, which is a really good analog for, I think, the relationships that we have in just about any position. So we didn't always get along in mission control. There's long histories of this, famous ones historically. There was once, and I think only once, a mutiny on the International Space Station. Back in the 80s, I believe it was, ish. The astronauts got so mad at mission control that they turned the radios off for a 24-hour period. I don't know that you would call it a hijack of the International Space Station, but mission control certainly felt that it was. Because they're like, you guys are renting this from us. We're mission control. We own that station. You have to talk to us. We have to know what's going on. This is a big deal. But there was such a breakdown in that teamwork and the communication between them that the astronauts had enough, because they felt that mission control, just like we feel sometimes with our bosses, we feel they're against us, and they get what's called an us versus them mentality. And it's destructive and toxic. And it doesn't help the team succeed. It doesn't help the team achieve whatever it is that we're trying to do. And so we had to work together in that regard. And so what are some of the ways that made us a good team is that first we had a lot of fun. But particularly, one of the reasons that we worked really well is because we shared a lot of values. And these values united us and built cohesion, particularly in the times that we were divided. So I'm the oldest out of 7 in a family. We can't get anyone to agree on what to have for dinner. Ever. How do you get 7 people to agree on anything? Right? So there's always going to be disagreements. Big deal. It's the things that we share together, our shared values, that help us to overcome what our differences might be. Right? That's how we find a solution. As we say, you think this, I think this. At what point do we have common ground? What do we share together that we can build on? And so that was such a core thing, because we're going to have to overcome those challenges, whether we're at work or we're trying to get to Mars. Because if you drive each other crazy on the way to Mars, think of how mad we've all been at certain times about people we work with or for, or family members or whoever. And you're like, think of whatever you felt and you were saying in your mind about that person or that situation. I just want out. Whatever swear word was in your mind, whatever. Imagine having to fly a spaceship and stay on course and not press the wrong button and not have the spaceship blow up or go off course. Under that stress. That's what we got to do. We've got to overcome these challenges. This is the shared values that really helped us to build that cohesion to deal with our natural differences. And so we found that the things that we valued the most, the certain mindsets and outlooks and attitudes, that helped us to overcome things. You know, when we find that we're having problems, we're kind of going in that classical sort of downward spiral, snark, sarcasm, negativity. Those things that can be really toxic. We found that when we were able to float ourselves back up above that vortex is when we kind of put that stuff aside. And again, Drew found what brings us together. So we had that shared worldview, and really the thing that stuck out for me was this idea I've been talking about since, is looking at everything as opportunities instead of obligations. So I found that several times we would have challenges. And sometimes you look at your calendar in the morning of what you have to do. You have no choice. They tell you, for the next 18 hours, here's everything you will do at these times. It gets frustrating. And you say, oh man, we got to do this. Oh, we have to do this today. We got to do this today. Here's the thing. Every day is the same. You're locked up. There's nowhere to go. Why are we surprised? Of course we got to do this. And what had changed is we changed our mindset. We said it's no longer an obligation. We have to do this task, or we got to do this task. Instead, it was an opportunity. We get to do this task. We get to live in a spaceship. We get to try these things out. And guess what? It was really, really frustrating at times. And maybe the only thing that was an opportunity was the opportunity for us to practice our skills and patience. But we had to find a way to take a positive spin on whatever was negative going on. And so among those differences, we still held those sort of core values together. And it allowed us to overcome any challenges we had. And I firmly believe in the future of human space travel, if we get that wrong and we mix worldviews and people have fundamentally different value systems, it's going to be really, really an insurmountable challenge. We've got to be on the same page, value the same things, care about the same things, because we're, just like any family, friends, we're going to have things we don't we disagree about. Watch any reality TV show, the producer keeps asking them, so what do you really not like about this person? No, they're good, we're getting along. No, really, come on, tell me what's wrong with them. Right? There's always a couple things we disagree on. So these things bring us back to home base when we have those shared things. And one of the questions they would ask us is, would you go on a 3-year trip to Mars with this person? That was on our surveys. It was one of the most telling. And the thing it made us really think of is, are you someone that someone else would want to go on a 3-year trip with? A little bit of self-reflection there. Because there's times I wasn't. There's a lot of times I wasn't. So by reflecting that, being asked about that, you know somebody is answering that about you. And it really made us take that self-awareness, look inwards and say, what can I do to be a better teammate for people that they want to be around? And man, was that transformative in helping us to overcome some tough patches. And we built a great sense of camaraderie. It was a lot of fun. You can see we're goofing around a lot. And so some of those things that really led to that camaraderie was, again, sharing this really good attitude. So the glass being half full, getting rid of that snark, that negativity. But that, the big thing here is that takes active effort. Like the natural way of things is to go downwards towards that stuff, especially when you're tired and sleep deprived and stressed. And the active effort is what we need to inflate that back up, right? So you got to keep sort of inflating that balloon, which takes effort to blow that up, and keep that up by actively thinking about it, actively reflecting on it, and really building that depth. So kind of having a gas tank of what I think of as a positive attitude. And so sometimes, the gas tank is low, it starts sputtering out, but if we can really kind of grow that gas tank of positivity and those good attitudes, it can help to fight the reality that fatigue does indeed make cowards of us all. When we're tired, we're awful. There's not a person on earth that doesn't get challenged when we're cooked. So these are much more easily said than done, and this is why we do these missions. We need to figure out, how do we do that? How do we do that more? Because it is really, really difficult. If they didn't have breakdowns of these things already in the space station, we wouldn't be practicing these on the ground to figure out how to get it right. So if you think it's a tough spot wherever you're at work, at home, in the office, those same things are still things we're trying to figure out on the space station. So it affects everyone, but we can all overcome it too. Let's see here. A couple things that I was kind of left with is this idea that complaints don't make spaceships fly faster. So how do we get along? Well, right? Have those positive attitudes, be those selfless teammates, and maintain those positive mindsets so that no matter how difficult, our experiences will be seen as opportunities instead of obligations. So I got to write a lot of reports sometimes for students or about students. Sometimes they're obligations. They're not so fun. But it's also an opportunity to practice writing skills. It's also an opportunity for me to find opportunities to get my students some success. Right? That means I can put them before me. And I always make sure I write the grants for students before I write the grants for me. So thinking of others and using it as an opportunity to help others reach success too. And so this idea, I think I wrote this in my journal in the middle of it. I said, be relentlessly happy, don't let the small frustrations get the best of you, practice good communication, and say the words, I'm sorry. Not just when you need it, but ahead of time. Oh my God, was I'm sorry helpful. Because I had awful, awful days sometimes where I was dragging because they didn't have good coffee. It was like mixed coffee. Like it was like the dry mix. It was hard. Almost coffee stops. I was really, really struggling. And so, man, I'd have to go down and I would just blurt out. I had to take some ownership and be like, guys, I'm doing terrible today. I don't know why I'm dropping the ball. I'm sorry. Can you help me? Man, they all knew I was doing terrible, right? They just wanted to see that I could acknowledge it because, as opposed to hiding it, right? Because as long as you ask for help, people were so much more amenable to not letting those problems then fester up. So we find the best in those situations, those reasons to smile, and the ways that we can serve other people really helped us. Because when we're stressed, the idea that we kind of learned was to stay focused, stay steady, calm, confident. somebody else is struggling, man, stay calm. Don't get mad at them. Maybe something's going on that you don't know about. And always do that service leadership where we can put others first. And this was kind of my thing that I said I walked in there with. My pyramid was the other way around when I started off. And I had to check that ego, and I had to change everything and say, I'm not as important as anything else. I'm actually the least important thing here. The team is much more important than I am, and the mission's more important than the team. What can I do every day to think about what the team member needs next? Oh, he's going to go to this next station. Maybe I'll go get him lunch. He doesn't have time to eat. I looked at his schedule. I planned ahead for him as a backup. We can help him out. Those things really made a difference. And so as we move back to Earth from these simulations from Mars, this is a quote from Frank Borman. Now, does anybody know who Frank Borman is? He's a legendary explorer, amid the best in the annals of human history, in my mind. He was the commander of Apollo 8. Apollo 8 was the first trip, uncharted, around the moon. When Neil Armstrong went there, several people had already gone to the moon and circled it. He plugged those coordinates into his GPS, and he just flew the route. He didn't pioneer that trip to the moon. Frank Borman did. They circled circled the moon with no chart, no even assurance that they even come home. They took this picture of the moon, the Earth, as they came back from the moon, and he said, when you're finally up at the moon looking back on Earth, all those differences and nationalistic traits are pretty well going to blend. And you're going to get a concept that maybe this is really one world, and why the hell can't we learn to live together like decent people? And it took him to go all the way out to the moon to look back to see how small we are and how we really are one big team on one tiny planet. And so that was kind of some of the things that we took forward from that. So some of the lessons that I learned for living together and certainly working together, right? Be good to people, especially when we feel terrible. Oh my goodness, when we feel terrible, that means they probably do too. They're all probably overstressed and overworked, and man, we got to forgive them, especially when they're not forgiving us, right? Because if not, man, you're going to go vortex to hell really, really fast. That's going to be a miserable summer trip in the camper. So, talk less, listen more, think more, and be at peace. So the thing is I had to work harder to earnestly take another person's point of view, because usually, if we're in a situation, somebody's bothering us at work, right? What can we do? We can leave, get some fresh air. We can fire them. We can quit. We can do lots of things, right? Can't do that here, which meant that before we opened our mouth, we had to think, what could this person possibly feel to act this way, and what could they feel and think after I say this thing I want to say? Wow. Imagine if we did that approach at work, how we treat people. That was kind of the idea in moving from opportunities to obligations, that when we can take that time, it's an opportunity to take another person's point of view. Man, if living together well means having to constantly reflect on how what we can do affects others, how much more is it going to be better to stay on Earth than go to Mars? You might never ever want to leave, right? So that was a really special experience that,
I was going to ask, when are they actually planning on doing this?
well, they're planning it right now.
Okay, but do you know when, how long until they actually...
Well, I think President Barack Obama said that we'd be there together with Elon Musk by 2015.
Yeah.
It's 2019?
Yeah.
So...
Anything to help?
Yeah, well, I say that just to show that we're delayed in our time. And I think the best way to think about it is we'll go when we're ready, when the science is ready, the engineering is ready to get us there and home, when the medicine is there to make sure we're protected from the radiation exposures, and when we have understood ourselves well enough to know that if we send a gajillion trillion dollars of all of your tax money they take from your paychecks, that we're not going to have an interpersonal problem on the way ruin the trip. I think that's when we're going to go, and we're probably a little bit of ways off. So the three things, I think that we can manage our egos, manage our insecurities, and make sure that we have the competencies on these trips, not just to get to Mars, but to bring it back home here to Earth. So it's sort of a trifecta I sort of learned about in the mission. We're all different in these sort of 3 dimensions. Some of us have big egos, some of us have small. Some of us have a lot of competencies, and some of us don't. And some of us might be really competent in one thing and horribly incompetent in another. I know I certainly am, on the incompetent side. You can ask most of my students. So, this idea that our differences are not our strength, but that it's our shared values that are our strength is something I really want to underscore, because we're never going to find any of us who are the same. We're going to have differences. There's nothing wrong with that. But man, if we find the common ground that we share together, we can overcome any of them. But we've got to understand what our values are that we share together, from which we can build. And from that, we really get the unity that's going to allow us to succeed when there's nowhere else to go. And particularly considering how our actions can communicate to others, particularly unintentionally. I think that's part of a mark of sort of as we grow into our responsibility as adults. I'm the oldest of 7, so I have a bunch of little brothers and sisters I've kind of seen grow up, and from kids into wonderful young adults now, and realizing at times when we didn't intend to do something, but our actions spoke louder than our words, and realizing that affects people even though we don't want it to. Man, yes, Brad.
It reminds me of intent versus impact. So sometimes we can make a comment to a colleague, and it's not our intent to be offensive, to be rude, or to be short or abrasive, but the impact. So I think that's really important too. I just think you to know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. The path to hell is lined with good intentions, and there's things we really mean well on. Sometimes people don't know what we meant, and they can take it pretty bad. And if we can take that little bit of extra reflection, man, can we make those spaceships go faster? Because if you're in a miserable situation, it seems like it's going much, much slower. And man, we will go so much faster if we, I think, we'd adopt some of those things. And, this idea came to me in putting this together and reflecting back on the mission, and is this idea that, if we can find peace, it'll bring us joy. But when you're in these situations, whether you're locked up in a prison of your mind at work or at home or the family, or locked up in a capsule on the way to the moon, if we find a way to bring others joy, right, putting them first, that service leadership model, bring others joy, and that'll end up bringing us peace. And to me that was something that I'm very grateful to have learned, because when you're isolated with 3 other people in a space capsule, the key was becoming a more patient person, having that patience, tolerance, peace, particularly no matter the situation, that we're allowed to take a breath of fresh air and step away from on our regular days, that we're not in these situations. So particularly the bad situations, being that peacefulness, that tolerance, and that patience that we can, do, doesn't just help us, it helps the other person to model that too. And so by being selfless instead of selfish, and finding those solutions instead of escapes, and reflecting on how what we do can affect others around us, if we do that more on Earth, we might never want to leave it. And that was something that really meant a lot to me. I know I'm very grateful to the team for letting me be a part of the mission. I learned an immense amount, not just from the teammates from our crew, but certainly the broader mission control, because we did have to work together as a team. We did have us versus them emerge at times. But the thing that really solved that was finding that we do have those shared values together and communicating about it. We communicated and said, hey, I'm really feeling this from you right now, and guess it's not making me all that happy. And they're like, oh, we're sorry about that. We didn't mean to make you feel this way. We're asking you to do these things because of this other reason. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And that went 2 ways, by the way. So that communication really helped. So I'm very grateful to them and to our team. The team is still strong. This is right up the road in Palmdale, that U-2 plane I told you about. This is me and Reinhold there, and this is him actually. He is now locked up in a 4-month mission in Moscow. This is him there with a bunch of Soviet cosmonauts. So you think it's tough in English. Imagine going being the American guy speaking Russian with everybody. Okay? And Paul and I, we just recently gave a talk at an investigator workshop down in Houston, so the team is still strong. We're still together. Shelley's doing great things. She's now out in Hawaii with the Pentagon. And I'm thanking all of them at NASA, the HERA Leadership, Mission Control, certainly our team, our families that allowed us to be gone, our mentors who helped us get there. We do a podcast with the coach of the U.S. national team for the Olympics on leadership and character development, and together with the mentors at Armstrong Flight Research Center, Gucci and Mead are the pilots of the U-2 that helped me to understand some of these factors that changed me, that got me to put my ego aside, learn to work as a supporting member of the team. It was transformative. And certainly I want to thank everyone here at CSUSB, particularly the lab in 2017 that was held down by the students while I was locked up. So Lindsay Sirianni, Alana Muller, Celine Gonzalez, Rose DeCock, they've done wonderful things, and I'm very grateful for that. Very grateful for you here at CSUSB. We were representing Cal State there when you were in there, and remind you guys that hopefully, this is just the start, not just for going to Mars, but certainly for our journeys here across the Earth. And we do define the future, but it's not really us. It's you guys. You guys are the future, and we're here to help you guys get there and make that future anything you want. And with that, I'll kind of close and just say thank you. And I'll be here around if you guys want to talk more about the mission, but I know you got to go. Yes, sir.
So, two elements that I would be concerned about if I were to be sent on a mission like this is claustrophobia,
Yeah.
obviously, and just boredom from being in the same routine with the same people in the same spaces. So how do you deal with that?
It's a really good question. We definitely had boredom at times. The boredom, though, was mitigated by, honestly, more by frustration, because you were bored that you're right. There was not a lot of change. It was the same thing every day, but they kept us so busy. We were scheduled they blared us open with huge, loud music at 7 a.m., and we were not allowed to sleep until 2 a.m. So all day, every day, we were constantly working on the schedule, and so we were worked to the bone and exhausted. And that also led to we would get frustrated with each other at times, but how we dealt with the boredom in the middle of that, because all that work, all that schedule is monotonous at times. There's no novelty. It's always the same thing over and over, and that's where a lot of the boredom came. We dealt with it in a couple ways. One, like I said, we tried to laugh at times. I brought a joke book because I'm not very funny. So it's particularly if we were mad at somebody, or we were having a problem, we'd bring out the joke book and be like, all right, let's at least read a joke or something. For me, on more of a personal level, I would listen to music and my earphones. I would, if I was having a hard time, I would listen. Sometimes I would just pray. Sometimes I would just try to go to those points I was talking about earlier where just mitigate that feeling and find peace. If I'm bored, if I'm frustrated, I think sometimes, you can't get out, but we went to different corners of the room and kind of tried to find your little solitude. It was a very big exercise in patience and finding a way to find that peace, which we don't have those opportunities in real life, because if you really need to find peace, sometimes you can just leave. And so we really had to work hard on that. So a lot of meditation and thoughtfulness, and I actually brought last thing I think of on that, I brought a little reading in with me of Russian literature. You guys know Leo Tolstoy?
Yeah.
Leo Tolstoy is probably one of the greatest geniuses of literature, potentially ever, in a lot of people's estimations. But he had a short story. One of them was called The Bet. No, it wasn't Tolstoy, it was Chekhov. Excuse me. Chekhov, not Tolstoy. Chekhov had a book called a story called The Bet. It was about a guy who made a bet that he could stay in this cabin for 25 years. And I brought that and I kind of read it, and it kind of helped me to realize, again, your priority systems. Stay at peace. Think about what could be bothering other people. How do I manage my own actions so that I don't make something worse for other people, and just be patient.
May I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
So the follow-up question, thank you for your answer, would be, in an experience of this magnitude, I would find it very difficult. Upon your return, did you find that some of your team members, possibly even yourself, had undergone a personality or psychological change?
Yes, a very, very good question. And yes, we did. We stay in touch, obviously, and we talked a lot. So we had a unique ending to our mission because it didn't go 45 days. We had an emergency abort on day 23 in the middle of Hurricane Harvey. So we came out and essentially in an apocalyptic scene of a city underwater, people dying, an emergency situation. And so it was stressful, and our adjustment period and our adjustment phase was very unique. So when we finally did come back here, or to each of our respective places, I think we did find personality changes. You can't go through something like that and not be changed. You just hope it's for the better, not for the worse. And I think we helped each other through that even after the mission, and being able to talk and decompress and kind of debrief with each other. And a lot of the things I shared today are things that I realized upon reflection over the years, looking back at that experience, that I hope I've been helped to change towards. Trying to be more patient, trying to, this talk notwithstanding, trying to talk less, trying to listen more, try to be more peaceful and patient and tolerant, and understanding other people's points of views. I was definitely changed in personality to try to be more like that, and I think particularly coming back from it, I probably spent 4 or 5 months where sometimes I would just sit by myself in my apartment, or I would hike for 10 miles in the thing and just enjoy that peace of quietness and no sounds, or other times just craving interacting with people too. So it was a very unique adjustment phase, and I think we all grew from it, and we helped each other through that, and we visited each other at times and talked on the phone, and it's not the type of thing that you go through is not transformative.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. Thank you for a very interesting talk. So the first one is, it seems like that you've had many coping or reframing strategies that you've developed yourself, as well as team communication strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Was this your individual kind of goal to develop these, or was this maybe part of the research study where you were creating those strategies and providing it to the researchers as in a form of something like that? And also, what's in this for you as
Yeah.
a professor who's part of your job as researcher?
Yeah. Wow, really good question. So there's a couple questions, and I'll try to take them one at a time. In terms of the coping strategies and reframing strategies, the simple way to answer that is to say they were more of a byproduct and a consequence of the experience. So I sort of developed that on my own, because I do have a background in psychology, so I'm the only psychologist to have done this project. They typically pick other engineers, so I was very unique in my approach there. So one of the strategies that I did do is I kept a journal the whole time. And it's an interesting thing in these in the literature, when people do these research studies of people in analogs or extreme environments, Antarctica, other submarine trips, and all sorts of other stuff, people hate having to keep a journal. But they love getting to keep a journal, right? That change between opportunities and obligations. So if you force someone to keep a journal, I promise you're going to have a lot of pissed off people in your experiment and study. How many people like having to write term papers? You're forced to write stuff that you don't want to. But if you allow them to do it sort of freely, without pressure, some people won't, and that's fine. That's not the thing. I brought it on my own. I kept it. It was cathartic. But I did it as a researcher because I knew that would provide a rich source of data for someone at some point who is interested in that. And it turns out that they were. So I told them I kept this journal, and I've been in touch with the researchers now, even just this past couple months, There are some anthropologists at University of Florida and Northwestern who found that I kept it, and they said, "What? Can we see it?" I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Can we scan it in?" I said, "I already did." And so because we're research, I know what they would need, so I prepped it, and it's actually become a rich source of data. So those strategies, those coping elements, those reframings are things that I learned, but they're not things that I learned on my own. They're learned together as a team and from the team, and also from the input and guidance of other mentors. And like I said, even before the mission, people helped to reframe the way that I looked at things, and that's a sort of a positive feedback loop. People help you to see things, you see things, and then you make sure you kind of continue that forward. And the last, I think, part to your question, how is that impacting me as a researcher, is a couple different ways. As a researcher, one, I got to see what it's like to be a crew member, right? So when you're Pavlov's dog, you don't ever get to see what it's like to be the dog. I got to see what it was like to be the dog, and that helps inform the better ways we design our experiments. So one of the techniques we learned there was some new kinds of brain recordings, and so when I came back, I was able to get some funding generously from CSUSB, where I got to go learn how to do the analysis of that new brain activity technique from a week-long class up at Harvard and MIT. So I got to learn that new technique, bring it back to the lab, and find ways to teach our students that and develop that into our integrations. And the follow-up step that has come is now we actually are doing experiments as a researcher, as a PI, and our lab is actually working together as a team where we're now conducting experiments on people in these analogs. And just this upcoming summer, we've been selected to take our CSUSB research to study astronaut cognition in these analogs underwater, actually in the Florida Keys. So we get to take our CSUSB students. Some of you guys from the lab, Constance, maybe you get to come down there with us and test astronauts at Johnson Space Center, and then also underwater in these submarine capsules that they live in once a year, in the only place on Earth, the only time on Earth for these 2-week missions. And that research we do is informed by my experience of understanding how are the people going to experience this from the inside. And we changed the experiments then, because there's some things you just don't know until you've done it. So very impactful result, I would say. So, yeah. Anyways, thank you guys again for your patience and coming and your time. I'm sure people have things to do, but I'll be here for a little bit if you guys want to talk privately. And thank you for the model of Mars. We got a 3D model of Mars that was generously printed earlier, and it's really, really cool. So if anybody wants to talk individually, we can definitely do that. And thank you guys to the library, the dean, Robbie, Pat. You guys are instrumental in providing these opportunities to the students.
Yeah, we just wanted to thank Professor Addante. Every time we've reached out to him, he's always been
Thank you.